Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to our Frenemies chat. I am joined by Read by Kyle. Just want to preface this and say I actually like Kyle. We're not enemies on everything. Kyle actually lives in a city that my family lives in that I found out not that long ago. So we do have that connection going for us. So we
I
have
I
that in common.
I want to explain how close it is.
Yes.
If I walked outside of the house I'm in right now, like if I walked out this window and I threw a baseball, there's a non-zero chance I could hit her grandfather in the head. Like
Exactly,
it's
which I
very
mean,
close.
probably wouldn't be ideal for him, but it's that close. So
Yeah.
Kyle and I do have some similarities that are common ground. We're Canadian. That's the thing too. So, we're gonna roll with it. But this came about because I was on a live stream with Theo of Rekindled Reader, and Game of Thrones came up because he's doing a reread of the series. I'm Flurry again. And he was talking about the fact that he hasn't really finished watching the show Game of Thrones. This is a good question. What do you have against Kyle? But I had been a massive Game of Thrones fan to the nth degree. Hi, Chris. And Battle of the Bastards is probably my favorite episode. Kyle then took to the Grimoire Discord where he voiced a very negative opinion on my opinion, and thus this live stream was born. Should we begin?
We should. A couple caveats. First of all, I was under the impression we were actual enemies, so I might have joined the wrong live stream.
Oh,
Um,
sorry, guys.
But secondly, obviously, this is all good fun, just so nobody
Yes.
gets it wrong. Like, it's fine if people love it. I actually normally with TV, like I'm a really big TV watcher, and like I watch like a lot of like prestige TV. So
Yeah.
generally speaking, when an episode of TV is critically acclaimed, I'm like right there with it. I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I just think this is like the one time where like the critics and everybody loved this episode. And I'm like, did none of you see how stupid it was though? So it's like it's very unlike me to like be on this side of this side. And even like Jake from Jake Bishop even pointed
Yep.
out that the next episode is like that's one of my favorite episodes of the series, and that's
So
full of dumb crap. And he's like,
it
here's all
is.
this dumb crap.
It is.
And you froze.
Did I? Am I still
Yeah.
frozen?
Oh no, you're unfrozen.
Okay, cool. That was going to be one of my questions to you is what is, if you have a singular favorite episode, your favorite episode? Because I think we need to lay the groundwork
Yes.
here of what in your mind is a good Game of Thrones episode.
Also, spoilers for all of Game of Thrones,
Yes,
obviously.
hot tip. If you haven't watched it, this probably isn't the live stream for you. So Theo, if you're tuning in, stop listening.
I don't know if I've narrowed it down to like a specific favorite. I do really like The Winds of Winter, the episode
It's a
immediately
great
following this.
episode. Yeah.
That is one of my favorites, but it wouldn't be like top favorites. Most likely, I mean, the Red Wedding episode is spectacular. If I'm actually thinking about it now, my favorite episode might be season 3, episode 5, Kissed by Fire. And then the fact that I remembered exactly where it was means it might be my favorite.
Yeah.
I think thematically that episode has the most amount of through lines and all of the storylines. To recap, the episode is called Kissed by Fire, but it's the episode where Sandor Clegane and Barek Dondarrion fight. So there's the
Yes.
fire there.
It's such a good
Yeah.
scene. Oh,
Ygritte and John first do the dirty deeds in the cave.
in the
So
cave.
she's kissed by fire. And there's like I just think that episode is just really well done. I think also the bathtub scene with Jamie is in that episode, but it might be the next episode. So
It's around then, so
yeah.
you could be correct, yeah.
So most of the episodes I really like tend to be like character specific episodes,
That's
and
fair.
rewatching Battle of the Bastards, like it mostly fails on like character logic to me, like
Okay.
in terms of why I hate it, but I also hate it because it doesn't make any sense.
I
But
mean, there are parts of it that I will concede are not logical, but at the same time too, it's so good that I
yeah,
don't
so that's the thing is that it's always the rule of cool. And here's the thing: people say like suspension of disbelief, right? But
Yeah.
everybody's suspension of disbelief is different. So, in season 7, there's a famous episode. I hate this episode. I actually hate this episode more than Battle of the Bastards. This is Beyond the Wall.
Yes,
when
I
they
also loathe this
yeah,
episode. She
where
can't get from Dragonstone
abs
above the wall
absolutely.
in 6
So
hours.
that's absurd. It doesn't make any
Yes,
sense. Like it defies, and that's when a lot of people's suspension of disbelief broke because we
yes,
know how speeds work. And so
yes,
we see Gendry running in snow.
yes,
And then even if we don't know how fast a dragon flies, we know how fast a bird flies, and we have a
yes,
general idea of how big Westeros is. So that triggered a lot of people's real sense of like,
yes,
I
this
don't
is
think this passes
problematic.
the smell test.
Yeah,
So whenever you're watching anything, if you have more knowledge of what it is and
yes.
it's wrong, that's when it's going to trigger it for you. And so like a battle scene, I mean, I just want to be like taken away into like the cool action. And I mean, I just thought so much nonsense happened in that. So I was just like focused on all the nonsense. Uh,
Oh,
but but positives are that I think that episode is a technical marvel. Like just the fact they were
yes,
able to film it, unbelievable. And I will never like castigate the hard work that all of those people put into it because it like
good.
technical perspective, unbelievable.
Yes,
Kit Harrington, who I normally think is wooden as all hell, is really good in
he's
that
so
episode.
good in this episode. Yeah, it's one of the best.
The one shot of John where he's like in the battle and there's like horses running.
The horses running at him is so good.
I just it's so good, and there's so much good cinematography in the episode that, like, I don't
Yes,
think I noticed on my first 2 watches of it. Like, there's one scene after the cavalry have come, which we'll definitely talk about that,
yes,
where, John is looking at Ramsay, and then he's all, like, covered in muck, and then
yes.
the giant, kind of walks over to him and, like, sags in and then
Torment.
Tormund pulls himself up out
Yeah,
of the muck to join him, and just like that visual of the 3 of them coming together was
so
stunning. Like, I
good.
was like, "This is a really good visual." So I do have positive things to say about the episode.
Okay.
I
So,
just think it's trash.
I mean, you're entitled to your wrong opinion, Kyle. That's
Yeah, yeah,
fine.
yeah.
If we want to talk about the episode as a whole, obviously we need to talk about the beginning of the episode because while this episode is titled Battle of the Bastards, and fundamentally we understand that that is John and Ramsay, it actually doesn't start the episode with them. The episode starts with Daenerys and she's fighting her own little battle because she's been off with Drogon in the middle of nowhere. She returns, seeing that everything has been run very poorly, thus proving that Tyrion was probably not the best choice for her as hand. And she decides she's going to murder everybody in the bay with her dragons. I will admit that I don't love this part of the episode. The only part of this that I really love is when Rhaegal and Viserion are released from their dungeon pit because I was crestfallen when they were put in
Yeah, same.
there. So that for me is the peak part of this whole thing. Do you like this part of the episode?
No, but what's interesting about it is that, so I've rewatched a lot of Game of Thrones like myself, and then I got my wife to watch it with me, and then that was the second time I watched Battle of Bastards, and I hadn't told her I didn't like that episode because I wanted like a newbie's perspective, and she
Sure.
turned to me and she's like, "There's a lot of stupid crap happening in this episode." I'm like, "Oh, thank you," but but then so we watched the end of the show together. So I have not watched this episode with the context of the end of the show. So
Okay.
I did find it more interesting now
Yes,
because they're clearly setting up what they want to do with Daenerys later.
I agree. I actually found that too this time watching it because I have not watched it also since the end of the show because I have a hard time now rewatching the show
Yeah.
knowing how it ends and basically refuse to rewatch it. So I agree. I was definitely like, oh, Daenerys insanity seeds are being sown right now. So
But
yeah,
my problem with this like it's hard to remember what I thought about it my first time versus now that I have the added context, but I do
sure.
still think Tyrion is not making any sense in this
Agreed.
episode. Um like what she says, first of all, Daenerys has this thing that she does in the show that she does not do in the books where people are like, "What's your plan?" And she's like, "My plan is to win."
Yeah,
And they're
that's
like,
not like
"Okay, but
Daenerys at
can we
all.
have a plan?" And she's like, "Yeah,
No,
my plan is to kill the people that aren't on my side. That's my plan." And
exactly.
she does that throughout the whole show. And it's supposed to be this like girl boss moment. And
Yeah, but it's
I
not.
just hate it. I'm like, you can say that first and then but then go into like an actual plan. So
Yes.
Tyrion was trying to be like, what is our actual strategy here? And she's like, kill them. And he's like, but then he switches out of nowhere to being like, what is our strategy? To being like, well, hold on, war is bad. Like, and I'm like,
Right.
why is Tyrion suddenly like war is bad? And he's like, your father burned a whole city to the ground. And he's like, but that's not like these people are attacking their city. Like whatever else you might be worried about, Daenerys is on the defense right now,
Yeah.
and so Tyrion being, like, suddenly all high and mighty about it seems really strange. It's like they're trying to, tee us up for the fact that Daenerys will eventually, like, go mad, but
Maybe. I think it's a reinforcement technique also though, because if I recall correctly, when Tyrion and Daenerys initially meet after Tyrion is like brought back by Jorah, he wants to understand how she plans to distinguish herself from her predecessor. And she says that she's not her father and he's not his father. And that's their bonding agent.
I agree.
So it's that reinforcement of the fact of we're better than that. We're better than this kind of thing, which is fine, but I agree. In this moment, your priority would be to quelch whatever uprising is happening, and you can have chats of diplomacy after, I feel like.
The next scene with Daenerys, where Theon and Yara show up,
Yeah,
that scene had no business being in this episode. I stand by that. I
agreed.
always think that. It should have started off the next episode, but
That would have been a better thing, yeah.
as a scene itself, I actually don't mind it. Like, I mean, there's, a couple lines I don't like, but that's fine. But
Right.
I really like at the end where Daenerys is like, all of our fathers were terrible men, but we're gonna leave the world better. I really like that that's where she went with it because I
Yeah.
didn't even think of that in the scene. I was like,
Oh,
"Oh,
yeah.
yeah. This is like a new legacy of these people, and, like, they're
Yes.
gonna reclaim Westeros." And it kinda makes it more tragic that then Daenerys ends up doing what she does. I know,
Well, I
yeah.
don't think book Daenerys would do that, but apparently maybe she will. But that's the thing. If side tangential note on Daenerys, because I want to preface this. I am a basic bitch in that I love John and I love Daenerys. Jamie's
Okay.
my favorite character from the
Me
books, but
too!
he's great, like
Yeah.
so good. But I really liked reading about Daenerys and John because John is our only perspective of what's going on north of the wall and with the wildlings. And then with Daenerys, she's our perspective of what's going on a different continent and with dragons. So fine. If he's gonna make her go insane in the books, you need like at least 2 or 3 books of build up to that. Like the way that the show handled this by just like putting in little snippets like they did in this episode, I'm like, this is not enough. Like, because Daenerys that we know, Misa, the one that's freeing slaves and freeing the Unsullied, that's not this character. So, yes, I agree. So, it does have that tragic element when you see, because that scene with Theon, Yara, aka not Yara in the book, and Tyrion, they do all have these terrible fathers. And book Daenerys would be owning that scene and we'd be like, yeah, we're gonna do this so much better. And then show Daenerys, they were like, oh, or not.
Yeah, it's a rocky road. If you get me started on why the show started going off the rails, that can open like 15 cans of worms. So I'm gonna try and rein it in to what we're actually discussing, which is that at the end of season 1 and like the end of book 1, I vividly remember arguing with people that I thought Daenerys was going to end up being the villain. Like I was like, "Oh, she's
Really?
being set up as being the villain." And I remember
Oh,
specifically because she was my mom's favorite character, and we got into a big heated argument. She's like, "She's going to save them from the White Walkers." And I was
oh,
like,
geez.
"Mom, she's going to be the villain." Like this totally, and so I was kind of justified in that, but I don't know if she's going to burn down. Like I think that was like what they decided to do,
Yeah.
but I mean, we'll see what we see. But yeah, they just don't know. They don't understand characters, so that's
No,
why
they really, really don't
they
because
wanted spectacle over character through line, and that really started
100%.
to throw things into the wrench.
100%. So we have the culmination of the Daenerys plot line in this episode. Well, not the whole plot line, but the initial battle sequence where we see these traitors that are telling her she's gonna, submit and this is her surrendering, blah, 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 blah. She's not surrendering, they're surrendering. This scene I don't love. I like in the sense that, Grey Worm slits the other
Yeah,
two throats.
I love that. Just like, man, Grey Worm's
Yeah.
such a badass. He's like, and I'm like,
I mean,
yeah,
that's
but
fine because I feel like Grey Worm was really underutilized in the show for how much of a badass he is
I
in the
agree.
books. Like he's supposed to be one of the best warriors ever, and in the show, he's kind of just this appendage of Daenerys, which is unfortunate. So I did like that part,
I don't know if I
but
agree with
yeah,
that. I think the reason so all of the Unsullied are very, very good, but they choose their own commander and they choose Grey Worm. And the reason that they choose Grey Worm seems to be that they agree that he's the best suited for command,
Yes.
which is not the same. But he is a badass, like
He is,
absolutely. But
yeah.
I feel like the reason he is the person we're following from the Unsullied is that he's good at leadership.
Agreed,
So.
very much so. But I think it's one of those things too that like, if you were to rank the characters and their abilities with fighting, I still think he'd be near the top. Like he's supposed to be very skilled.
Absolutely.
And it's just the plot lines that they gave him in the show were a love story and not a here are my skills story. So it's nice in this moment that we actually get to see that. But then the episode kind of transitions to our battle of the bastards called like beginnings. So I love Ramsay Bolton.
Okay, when you say love Ramsay Bolton, I need some clarifications.
The actor is so good.
Knocks it out of the park.
He's so good. Ramsay is such a villain. And he's one of those rare villains that he's a villain because he's a villain. Like there's not much background other than the fact that he was a bastard and his father didn't make him a true born son. And that kind of ended up being his plot line. Yes, 100% agree. Barristan Selmy was a real dumb choice, but that's because he wanted to go do Star Wars, I believe, that they like got
they killed him off. He had read the books and he thought that he was going to be getting a bigger storyline, and then they killed him off, and he was like very vocally upset about it. Like he went and tried to change their mind, and like they were like, no, this is what we're doing, and he even talked to the press about how he was really disappointed.
Interesting, because I always heard it was a Star Wars thing, so I'm gonna look into that after we talk. But yeah, so what was I saying? Because now I'm totally flustered. Oh yeah, Ramsay Bolton. So the actor is so good. My favorite facial acting probably out of any of the cast, which is saying a lot because I think generally the show is very well acted. So the scene where they meet for the first time, the looks that are being exchanged between him and John are some of my favorites of the whole series, which helps me in why I love this episode so very much.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading that.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're on again in the. We can't get too off base of this. I'll just talk about everything I hate about.
We'll do that for another episode, but we'll have a lot of Game of Thrones chats apparently because I think we're gonna have
to. So my problems with this episode are twofold. It's from character perspective, and like I just think like logically the battle doesn't hold up. But the main problem that I have in this episode in terms of like where it fits in the show is Sansa is so stupid in this episode to the point where it physically hurts me. Like it is actively hurtful to everybody that she doesn't tell them that the veil is coming.
I know, it's so dumb.
And there's just no reason for it. And then like it would be one thing if she was trying to have like an ace in her sleeve, like like, you know, I want to be the one that's in power, or like she was conniving about it, but I don't even get that sense. She literally comes to John and she's like, hey, we need a better strategy. Don't go into what he's doing. And then John's like, okay, you're right. And to her credit, she stands up for herself. She's like, you are not taking me seriously. And I can be helpful. And then to John's credit, he's like, you are right. I'm not listening to you. What can we do? And then, and this is the literally the most frustrating part of the episode to me, is she just says, oh, don't do what he wants you to do. And then John dismisses her, as he has every right to at that point. He has accepted that he was being brash and sexist. And he's like, what should I do? And then she does not offer any information. She does not put forward that she has soldiers coming.
Yep.
So I just hate this scene with the full force of 1,000 Suns.
That's fair. Honestly, that's fair, because this is my biggest gripe with the episode as a whole in terms of things making sense. And my husband and I have talked about this at length because he, like you, doesn't love Battle of the Bastards. He thinks parts of it are very good, mostly like the cinematography, and there's a few particular scenes that he really likes, but he loves Winds of Winter, which comes next. So we've talked about this at length, but her not saying that the veil is coming is inherently moronic. It's just stupid. And I get that they want to have this big build reveal at the end of the episode, but if you were paying attention throughout the course of the 6th season, Sansa is clearly writing Baelish. So that's not a massive surprise. Like I remember when I watched this the first time, I was like, someone showing up at the end of this episode. This isn't where John dies, because they're not going to resurrect him to then have him die to Ramsay. Like, that
Yeah,
just doesn't
the
make
tension
sense.
in the episode was really not there, and that's so if you take something like Blackwater, I'm sure, or even like Battle of the Wall, which I also think is fantastic.
I love
Maybe
that
one of
too.
maybe the best John episode, if I'm thinking of, or
It's
Hard
a good
Home is
one.
maybe Hard Home too. So all
Oh,
these other
so
battle
good.
scenes, I'm sure if I like sat there with a critical lens, I could point out something that doesn't make any sense, but
Right.
the tension, like I'm not paying attention to that because I'm very tense. Like Hard Home is one of the most petrifying. I thought anything could happen during Hard Home.
Yeah, I did
Uh,
too. Tormund,
so
I was like, sure, gonna die.
yeah, I mean,
100%.
every single battle, I'm like, this is it. Tormund's going, and then you
Tormund's
just
gone.
never.
And
Yeah,
Tormund was one of my favorites, so I was on
same.
edge every time it
Yeah,
happened. So yeah,
for
I
sure.
hear you.
So the lack of tension in that
Yeah.
is why I'm more critical of the battle scenes because I'm like, well, we know that they're not gonna resurrect John and play
Yes.
this whole like is he coming back thing for a year and then kill
Yes.
him in this battle. And
Yeah.
Sansa's clearly not going to be killed. Davos is not really in the battle. Davos I hold near and dear to my heart. So if they made
I
it
love
seem like
Davos too.
Davos was going to die, I think that would have scared me more. But
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry,
I
you were in the
agree.
middle of something. I keep cutting you off because I don't
No.
want to forget what I'm saying. You were
No.
saying something though. Do you remember what it was?
No.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. Uh, a lot of book fans, and this isn't just like Game of Thrones specific. It's all shows. Wheel of Time is really got it. Is that we care about the lore more
Yes.
than right. So, and I try to take a step back from that because I understand somebody watching a show doesn't need to know all of that stuff. Like as long as it makes sense on the screen.
Right.
But they are using the same map in the show that they're using in the book. So canonically, like Moat Cailin is preventing the Vale from getting there.
Yeah.
Canonically, the Vale army has to be extremely far from Winterfell. Logically, for them to have gotten that close, somebody like it would have taken a couple of days at least. I don't know the exact amount of time, but it would have taken a long time. It would have been a big army. Somebody would have seen them coming. Ravens would have flown. They would
Yeah.
have been vaguely aware of there being a big Vale army in the north. You cannot hide. You could if it was like if Ramsay had a reinforcement coming from the Dreadford, which is like pretty close to Winterfell, they could do like a
Not far,
fast
yeah.
march. I could see that being a sneak, but like
Yeah.
there's just no way the Vale can get past Moat Cailin. And so many of these things, like when people got mad about them, because I was really in tune with all the complaining as the show aired, and people would
Mhm.
complain about teleporting characters, and I
Yes.
usually didn't care. Like if Littlefinger, like if he travels from Harrenhal to to Bitterbridge to King's Landing in an episode, I'm like whatever. Like it speed lines things up. It doesn't make sense. But this like it doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
for the Vale to have gotten there secretly at the end just kills me. And if you
I
compare
didn't
that,
even think of that. So
it,
that is a good point. I did not think of that, because Moat Cailin definitely does add an element of prevention for them. Like Harrenhal to King's Landing theoretically would take like half a day to a day. So that
right,
type of thing like makes sense. But my brain can justify the Moat Cailin thing with saying maybe Ramsay brought like everyone in the area into Winterfell type thing. So we'd have more people. I don't know. Like
that
that's
would
my
okay.
brain trying to
So
justify that.
that would be even stupider because all
I
of my
know.
other problems would still exist, and then it would make Ramsay even dumber because Ramsay's hold on the north needs to come from Moat
Yeah.
Cailin. That's how everybody holds the north. So he would
Mhm.
have to leave somebody there. And so that would just make him. I just think it was an oversight. I think they went for
It
spectacle
was.
over logic, and it drove me crazy.
Which, to be fair, I feel like that was a major issue with a lot of this show.
Yes,
In certain cases, I feel like that happened a little bit earlier on in the series, but less so. But I feel like that became more of a plot device in
it was a
the
self-fulfilling prophecy where every time they did that, people would talk about it, so they thought that was what made the show good,
yeah,
and they kept
exactly.
doing that. And honestly, I think a lot of my if we lived in a different world and Battle of the Bastards came out and people were like, "That was a fine episode," I would be like, I thought it was kind of dumb, but like it's fine."
Yeah,
But because people so much loved that episode, it like
yeah,
rewarded all of the stupidity. And obviously, in hindsight, like I mean, then season 7 and 8 came out and they were just
yeah.
trash. And I'm not saying the markings of that are in Battle of the Bastard. I think it's way earlier, but I think Battle of the Bastard is the moment where the spectacle trumps all logic, and then people loved it. So they were like, "Yeah, who cares? We're just gonna do crazy
That's
stuff." And
interesting. I could see that argument being made and accepting that argument because I agree. For me, the show really turns in season 5. That's when
Yes.
things like
Well, I
go
swore
sour.
off the show when they killed Stannis the way they did. I actually
Oh,
was so
so
mad that I
bad.
I wasn't gonna watch it, and then, a year
Ugh.
went by and I got over it, but
I love Stannis. Book
me
Stannis is
too.
one of
Yeah,
my favorite characters.
same.
So I agree. I had a really hard time with that. But at that point, I was so heavily invested that I was like, I can't not watch. Like, what else are they going to do?
Also, at the time of season 5 coming out, it was right when Martin was saying he was almost done Winds of Winter, like, that was the
Which
the
was real
winter.
cute.
Well, that was the winter. I think he did a major rewrite because that was the winter where he said he was gonna be done by Halloween, and then he missed it, and then they were like, "Can you get it done by the end of the year?" And he said, "Yes." So I'm like, "You thought you could finish this in 2 months. Something must have really changed." So at
Yeah.
the time, yeah, absolutely.
The
So at the
one true king
time,
Stannis.
I thought, "Okay, well, I'm gonna quit this show because Winds of Winter is gonna be out. I'll get the real story. This is stupid nonsense."
Right.
And then by a year later, I was like, "Ah, Winds isn't out. I wanna know what happens." So
Yes.
that's where my whole thing went.
I completely get that. And I mean, who knows if we're ever going to get another book? Who knows, Kyle? Because I
We're
don't
gonna get
know.
Winds of Winter. We won't. I don't think we'll get the last one. Winds of
I don't
Winter's
either.
too far done to not get released. If George died tomorrow, which please don't, George. If he died tomorrow, they would still release something, I think.
Probably. Yeah.
But the last book I think is lost to us. But I hope
Probably.
I'm
I
wrong.
mean,
Yeah.
according to his latest update, which who knows, it's 75% done. So
And
we
that
might
was
get it
almost
in
a
the
year
next 5
ago.
years. So
No,
no, this
yeah.
was like a month and a half ago. He said we're 75% done. So
No,
he
no,
just
no.
hasn't said anything in a year.
I keep track of this. This was at the beginning of the year. It wasn't quite a year ago. It was like January, February.
No, but he said something like a month ago. There
That's
was
when you
a
that's when you saw it, Laura.
no, 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 no. I went and I actually read an
Okay,
article
okay.
from a month ago.
I'm gonna fact check you after this, but that's
That's
fine.
fine. I'll
I'll
have
admit
to
if I'm
find it.
wrong. Okay.
But I think it was in context of he was also talking about season 2 of House of the Dragon. So I think it was like all
Mhm.
like
Gotcha.
upcoming stuff. And he mentioned in that as of this point, I'm 75% of the way through. It wasn't like a press release on his blog kind of thing, like, hey, new update type thing, which I know he's done in the past. But yes, Book Stannis is
Them
excellent.
cutting Renly's peach, I just, again, it's
Yeah.
so easy in hindsight, but in season 2, I saw the writing on the wall, and I obviously didn't know it would go off. I mean, I would have never predicted how much people would dislike season 8. But in season 2, I was like, yeah, they're doing stuff where I'm just like, I don't think they understand all these characters. Like Jamie
Yeah.
killing his cousin to get out of
Yeah.
prison. I hated that scene. I was like, this doesn't make any sense for Jamie. And
No.
them cutting Renly's peach, I was like, these are small scenes. Like cutting that scene isn't that big of a deal, but it's so important to who Stannis is.
Yeah.
I man, they just
I
made some
agree.
missteps.
A random question, but one I feel I now have to ask that is completely irrelevant to our episode discussion. But if you look at all seasons of the show, what is your ranking order? Because for me, season 2 was my least favorite for a very long time because of the fact that they did very distinct changes like that until season 8 came out. And then season 8 won by a long shot. But do you also not love season 2?
I mean, season 2 has some really good stuff in it, so like I like it more than so my least favorite is 5, far and away. Like 5 is a bad season. Oh, well, no, 8 is the worst season.
There we
Sorry,
go. Okay,
that's
yeah.
that's obvious. That was like a priori. Like, of course,
Yeah.
season 8 is the worst.
Yes.
And then season 5. I like season
Exactly.
7 more than I like season 5 because season 7 had some
Same.
really good stuff.
I am 2
Um,
and 5 were always vying for my least favorite until 8 came out.
Yeah, and then it would probably be 2 for the reasons that you mentioned, but 2 has Blackwater, which is also
Which is
one of my
great.
favorite episodes. But
It's an
yeah,
excellent episode because it's written by George. That for me
yeah,
was the saving grace of that season. But for me, the major issues is that you and I have vaguely discussed this, but I haven't read the books in over a decade. But when I did read them, book 2 was my favorite of the books. Whereas I know most people, book
interesting.
3 is their favorite. So
As all things should be.
well, as I said, basic bitch over here. I love Daenerys and I love Jon. So
Yeah, but
the House of
Daenerys's
the
plot.
Dragon
Okay,
plot is
John's
so
John's
interesting.
plot in Clash is really good, but
Yes,
Daenerys's really the
I
one the
love the
one
House of
boob
the
city.
Undying. Oh, the House of the Undying is so good, and they completely changed how it was
Yeah,
presented in the show, which was
I
such a
think they
bummer
had
because
to.
it's great. That's what my husband likes to tell me to try to console me when I rail on how bad the changes were, but
I
It's
don't know.
moot.
I think
It's
Karth
fine.
sucked in both iterations. Like, I just don't like either of them. But House of the
Really?
Undying is, yeah, Karth sucks. I don't like anything about Karth. Um,
The
House of
greatest
the
city that
Undying is
was or
good.
ever will be?
Okay, Payat Pri or Zero Zohan duck sauce. But you know what's funny? I'm sorry, we're getting off topic, but that's totally
Yes,
fine.
we
But
are.
the actor who plays Zero Zohan Daxos in the show, Nanzo Enzari, is a really good actor. I really like
He's
him.
great.
I've
He
seen
was
him in other
recently
things.
in Ted Lasso,
I was
and
just
I
gonna
love
say
him.
he's in Ted Lasso, and he was great in Ted Lasso.
Yes,
And
he
the
was.
moment he showed up, I turned to my wife and I was like, "It's Zero Zohan duck sauce!"
That's
Like I just
exactly what
every
we
time
said
he says
too.
it, like it's just so funny.
Yeah, we completely agree because my husband and I looked at each other and said the exact same thing. And I was like, he's even better on this show than he is in Game of Thrones.
Absolutely, he's a really underrated actor. I really like him.
Agreed. I think he's excellent. So, returning to our episode, we have the initial meeting between Ramsey and his like weird people standing behind him. Then we have John, Sansa, and Davos standing there on their horses. They disperse. We have the conversation between Sansa and John in the tent. I like part of the initial part of that scene when John is trying to explain pincer moves and Tormund has zero idea what he's referencing.
Tormund's a gem.
Tormund is the gift that kept giving really until the very end.
Tormund, like, it's funny because I'm talking about like book to show translations, terrible. Like he is not
Yes.
his book character at all, but both of them are equally great in entirely different ways. Like I just love it.
100%
Yeah.
agree. 100%. Yeah. Tormund for me in the book was delightful. I remember when I first started reading about John Above the Wall, and I was like this Tormund character that we're seeing some of here. And then when we met him in the show, I was like, he is the best. And his whole thing with Brienne was just perfection.
Unbelievable.
Like, perfection. I could not have asked for more from show Torment. But I like the dynamic of that scene, and I like the little conversation that he has with Davos as they're entering or leaving the tent. I think it's appropriate for before a battle to kind of have a conversation like this where you're sort of melancholy, but you're being realistic about it. Like, we've got this horrible thing that we're going to do in the morning. Try to get some sleep if you can. I like this scene. And then Stannis, or not Stannis, not at all Stannis, the fault of Stannis, but Davos finds the little stag of Shireen's, then that then sets up for like later. So that kind of then too lets you know, I feel like, that Davos isn't gonna bite it in this episode.
I agree.
So a little anticlimactic on that front. But all in all, I'm not that upset about it. One of the things I love about this episode, and if you don't like this, then we will become enemies, is the music. I think the music in this episode is so good for the battle sequence.
I didn't pay attention to it this time. Like, I probably agree with you because I think the music, like Ramin, I'm not going to say it last one. The composer of the show.
Yeah, he's so good.
10 out of 10. Like,
yeah,
he does so
not,
good. So I'm sure that I agree with you, but I was trying to be like, why do I hate this battle and not like the music's good. So like I probably agree.
Yeah, that's fair. Thoughts on the Forsaken chapter?
Unbelievable. Have you read this chapter?
Which chapter is this?
So this is a preview chapter of Winds of Winter. It is an
No, I have not read any of them.
Listen, read that one.
Okay.
It is really good. It's an Aaron Dampere chapter.
Okay.
And I don't like, he's my least favorite POV character by far. Like if I was to rank them all, he would be like 20th by a long mile. And that chapter is just incredibly good. Like,
okay. I will definitely check it out. But yeah, no, I haven't read anything from Winds of Winter. I haven't been in a rush.
Fair. You know what's funny is I don't reread them constantly because there's like a lot of them, and some of them are just like Barristan getting ready for war, so it's like not a big deal. But every time I do a reread, I'm just like, oh yeah, what goes on in that like Mercy chapter again? And I'll like reread it. So I've reread a couple of them like 3 or 4 times.
That's fair. The beginning of the battle, we have young Rickon, who's not so young anymore, being dragged out, and they play this fun little game where Rickon can't run in a straight zigzags and only runs in a straight line. So one of the things that people can definitely criticize is the fact that Davos says to Jon, we can't run into them. And what does Jon do? He runs into them like a moron. But I feel like this epitomizes what Stark and Targaryen blood would do together. They would not make good choices They would make overly loyal and rash decisions, and that is 100% what John does in that scene.
Ironically, that is not one of my problems in this episode at all. Like
That's
I
fine.
don't think John handles any of this. I mean, he handles it
Well,
poorly, but I mean,
yeah,
I mean, it's his brother. Like, of course he would handle it poorly. Like, I
right.
totally get it. Yeah, Rickon. First of all, bless Art Parkinson. He was cast when he was a very small child, but that guy like is not a good actor, and maybe
No,
he will become one. But in that, he does
not in
not
this
sell
scene.
that scene to me at all. Like
Yeah.
literally at all. And yeah, running in a straight line is stupid. Um, and also, this is so in my memory, this is actually something that was a little bit better on rewatch. In
Okay.
my memory, I was mad that like Rickon dies and then they just leave his body there.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't even try to take his body, and I was like really mad. And on rewatch, it's a little bit better. I remembered that they shoot a volley, and so like he can't get to his body, but he doesn't
Yeah.
even try. Like he just gets mad and he's
No.
like about to charge, and then a volley comes and he leaves. He's like, "You're gonna leave your dead brother's body in the middle of this battle? Like you're never gonna find his body again." And
Yeah.
that's not that big of an issue, but I feel like TV always trivializes the dead body of relatives, like or like
Sure.
friends and stuff,
Yeah.
and that's just like a general thing I don't like. Like if your brother died, like I mean, people literally in life would cause ceasefires so they could
Yes.
pick up the dead bodies of your soldiers and loved ones and relatives is a
Yeah.
big deal. And
Yeah.
so shows just never take that seriously. So that's like a general TV problem that I had, not like a
Yeah.
Game of
I would
Thrones
agree
thing.
with that.
Yeah.
Also, I think that kind of plays in though to what I was saying with John earlier, in that it's that like rash, not thinking things through, which
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's characteristically John from the beginning of the show, very much until like the last episode when they decide to try to make him like a pensive character. And I'm like, he's not. Like,
Yeah.
so that's a whole other thing. But for me, okay, so obviously then the rest, like the big chunk of this episode is the fighting that ensues on the battlefield. We briefly touched about this earlier because you said that you did like this part. The cinematography, I think, during this whole battle sequence is so good. And I just love it so much.
Yeah, it's really good. Also, I just want to shout out because people like rip on the last seasons. They're technical marvels, and like Battle of
Yeah,
Winterfell, somebody mentioned earlier. I hate that episode. Um,
there's some
but
cool stuff in it though.
I read the oral history of a Game of Thrones, which I recommend to anybody who likes this show. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. And it went into like the making of Battle of the Bastards, and especially the Battle of Winterfell, which I think, I mean, every person on that crew should get an award and a raise. Like, it is
Yeah,
unbelievable that they made that episode under the constraints that they did. It like
yeah,
look into it; it's incredible. But even Battle of the Bastards, also, like it's just incredible that they managed to do this in the time that
yeah,
they did it. So I feel like people get a little blasé about that, and they're like they forget how much hard work went into it. So I
yeah.
want to acknowledge that while also saying it's a stupid piece of shit. Like I don't like it at all. Uh, like,
To put it mildly, it's
um,
award winning, but a stupid piece of shit.
hey, the crew guy who wakes up at 3 in the morning and works a 15-hour day to do the
He
stunt
deserves a
coordination.
medal.
Yeah, he's doing great. The guy
Yeah,
writing
he
the
is.
episode, hang him. That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Well, the direction of this episode, which is Miguel Sapochnik, is some of my
Yeah, he's
favorites because
fantastic. I mean,
Miguel is so good. He did Hard
unbelievable.
Home, and then he
Yeah.
did these two back to back, Battle of the Bastards and Winds of Winter, and then of course he's gone on to do House of the
He
Dragon,
also
but
did Battle of Winterfell.
Winterfell, didn't
Which
he?
he did, and
Yeah.
also he never like he always towed the company line, but you could tell he was having a lot of friction with D&D by that point
Yeah. By
because
this point, yeah.
he didn't want to come back for the last season, and they really wanted him to do that episode. I think he did 2, but he didn't really want to do that episode, and
Yes.
he said that he was really constricted by what they wanted to do, like they wanted no changes. He actually wanted Jorah to die at the very beginning in the charge and just never come back. That's the last time we see him, to just establish the stakes right away. And I'm like,
I
that would
think
have
that
been
would have been better.
awesome. And they were like, absolutely not. And so like I don't fault him for that, but yeah,
No, I don't
he's
either.
fantastic.
He has left House of the Dragon though, so he will not be part of season 2, which is a
He
whole
is
other.
producing, so we'll see. We'll see
I
how
heard
that
that
goes.
he had left in all capacities because they wouldn't make his wife a
That's
co-producer.
that seemed like a rumor to me. I read that exact thing. That seemed like a
Okay.
rumor. I think we'll see like later when they start doing promotion for the season and stuff. But
yeah, I am going to be curious to see because HBO did do like this release of saying that the show was going to be exclusively show run by Ryan Condal and no longer with Miguel. So I do wonder if he's going to be a producer. It'll be interesting to see because I feel like I have issues with the first season of House of the Dragon. I think there are some good elements into that show, and I feel like the good elements are Miguel. So,
I don't agree with anything you just said. I love
what?
House of the Dragon. I mean,
Oh,
there's obviously flaws. Like I don't think it's perfect.
yes, there are
But
some. I'm
right,
rewatching it right now because, as you know, I've been listening to Fire and Blood. I've got like 20% left of this book, and I've been doing comparisons to the show and the book. But that's another conversation, Kyle.
yeah, I know.
That's fine.
That's the thing. We just get off topic.
I mean, it's hard to stay on topic when there's so many Game of Thrones things.
I
that
totally
you can
agree with Christopher down here about like Rickon. They just forgot about him.
100%,
Also,
especially because at the end of or the beginning of the next episode, when they burn all the bodies, and there's that moment for Ed, and then there's the moment for Jorah. Like you could have then, or no, I'm thinking, sorry, of the Battle of Winterfell.
yeah.
I've completely conflated those in my head, but yeah, no, there should have been a moment for that.
I don't think they even mention it in the next episode that Rickon died. They might. I haven't watched it in a while. Also, at the end of the episode, there's not even a conversation with Sansa. Like, because Sansa leaves, she goes way down to the Vale and just bypasses Moat Cailin on a dragon or something, and brings the Vale army on horseback. Also, just real quick, I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep derailing us. Have you seen Rings of Power?
Yes, Kyle.
So you're aware of the 55-minute scene of the horse cavalry just across, like they're just like, we got to get to the battle, and they're just like crossing all of entire Middle Earth, and then they're just exactly where they need to be. I'm just like, oh my god.
Oh my gosh, Rings of Power. That is a whole other conversation of terrible adaptations of things. But yes, no, I saw that scene and I agree. It is very similar in that they kind of just show up where they need to be. But I am more inclined in this to believe it because Sansa's writing Baelish saying, this is where we are, come here.
Oh, I know. I totally agree. They would know where they needed to be.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the issue. It's more that they got
I agree, though. It's just very convenient and it's plot armor.
Yeah. With Rickon, though, again, like to reiterate, like that they don't care about character.
Yeah.
We don't know what Rickon's going to do in the books, but Martin does not just put stuff places.
No, it's intentional.
I'm not saying Rickon will for sure survive, but if I was to place my bets on any one character surviving in the series, it would be Sam. The second would be Rickon. Those are the two characters I'm like very sure will live. And like obviously I could be wrong, but Rickon being so young and then being taken away until like near the end of the series makes me think that like he's needed for the very end. Like I feel like he's going to be the Lord of Winterfell, or he's going to be the only continuation of the Stark line, even if he's not necessarily Lord of Winterfell, something like that. But regardless, he left for a long time, and then now Davos is bringing him back in the books. I'm not saying that Winds of Winter is going to be the Winds of Rickon. He's not going to be a major character, but he's coming back, so he has a role to play. And the show is just like, oh yeah, this guy we kind of forgot about. Let's just bring him back and immediately kill him. They did the same thing with Osha.
Yeah,
and it's just because they just want that spectacle. They just want people to be like, wow, they killed the brother. Like,
yeah, well, that became the Game of Thrones MO because after you kill, Ned, that's what ends up happening because it just becomes a sensational thing. And for book readers, you just come to realize that this is what's going to happen. Certain people are going to bite it, but the show made it like, oh, who can we kill for the most, surprise to shock everybody? And it just it lost all relevance, I feel like, at that point. But I feel like Davos is going to be one of the two people at the end. Like if I were to put money on it,
I do think Davos is going to live. The only reason I'm not 100% on Davos is how world weary and tired he always is.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I do think he will live. Like if I was just like a yes or no, but
yeah, but I'm with you 100% Sam. Like
there's just no way Sam's dying. The only way Sam's dying is if the end is actually the others win and they kill
exactly, which is what should have happened in Winterfell. I'm just throwing that out there. Like realistically, if we're following the books, those people all would friggin' bit it. Like none of them would be alive. But again, a different conversation, and we digress.
This will just have to be a series. Just every episode of the show past season 5, we're just gonna just lambast.
I mean, if you want to do it, Kyle, I'm game to do it because honestly, this has been very enjoyable so far. Absolutely. But if we return to our Battle of the Bastards, Rickon's now dead. They've run all past Rickon. My favorite shot, possibly of the whole series, is those horses running at John. Like that
Yes,
for me
fantastic.
is such a good shot. And I knew immediately when watching that, I was like, that is real. Like, that is not CGI. And then when I watched the making of the episode, they were like, yeah, those horses were really running at Kit Harington. And I was like, it was worth it because the shot's amazing.
Yeah, it is so good. And so right after that, a scene happens, and I want to juxtaposition it with like I will jump a few scenes ahead to why a scene makes me mad, but then this part doesn't. So John gets on his horse, and then he's running, and then the volley comes, and it like shoots his horse out from under him, and he's fine,
Yeah.
and he just like falls off.
Yes.
Like if we're talking logically or like chances, he most likely would have gotten hit. This
Oh,
scene does not
100%.
bother me at all. Like the logic in this does not bother me because
Okay.
we're following like I mean it is plot armor, but like
Yes.
it is meant to get him off of his horse. Like from a storytelling structure, they want to get him from up high up on his horse to down on the ground so they can then do that scene where he's on the so like it all makes sense why they need to do that.
Yeah.
And it could technically happen.
Mhm.
Later in the episode, Tormund absolutely should have died when he goes up to the wall of
Yeah.
people and he's the only one fighting them and he's pulling
Yeah.
the swords off. First of all, badass, absolutely. But
Love
second of all,
Tormund.
100% should have been killed. And that is because we are
Agreed.
now delving into human psychology, which is that the way this battle goes, they have their shield up and then their spears, and then they have the next person behind them that's supposed to jut and
Yes.
stab. That is the reason that formation works. And so
Mhm.
when Tormund comes up, he might be able to tear off the first guy or the second or whatever, but then the guys behind him all have spears. There's going to be like 4 or 5 people with, and they would have just
That
speared
would
him.
have poked him,
He
yeah.
absolutely would have died. There's a 0% chance he would have lived in that moment. And so that is why that makes me crazy because that's plot armor to a point where like, well,
Yeah.
these people just like aren't doing their jobs. They're standing
Yes.
there to do nothing. And so that's when it starts to bother me.
I can get that. And I mean, we vaguely discussed this because I had mentioned this on my live stream with Theo and then you commented on it, but I like this because my degrees are in ancient history and the worst battle that the Romans ever lost was the Battle of Cannae. And this is what happened in Cannae, not the body piling. That is something that was supposedly from the Civil War in America. So that irrelevant, but them getting caught in that circle and then being picked off one by one is actually based on a Roman battle where the Romans were slaughtered. And I liked that was actually a very good representation of that. That for
It
me was good.
but I have 3 major problems with that, but one is the bodies, which that's a whole that's a rant I have to come back to.
Yes.
But I have 2 other things that I have problems with in that. First of all, those soldiers come literally out of nowhere to like it doesn't like they can't and like people can only walk as fast as people can walk
Yeah.
and they're carrying all their armor and literally like they're fighting like the setup of the scene doesn't make any sense. They're fighting and all of a sudden there's just a metric shit ton of bodies, which we'll come back to. But let's just take that as a premise. There's a metric shit ton of bodies. And then like literally they just stop fighting for like 1 second and then just like 1,000 people just come out of nowhere. Where are these people?
Yeah.
Why were they not fighting? If I actually would have 20% less problems with this scene if they just showed a clip of Ramsay being like this and then showing that he had people in the wings or something. That would have eliminated a lot of problems for me.
That's fair.
They just show up out of nowhere, and then while they're showing up, John and Tormund and all of his men are like, and then they just totally get surrounded.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not. I know they're nodding to Kane, but that was a plan, and it worked because. And this is my second problem: Ramsay is not Hannibal.
No, he's not.
No, I'm super glad Tormund lived, Christopher. I'm just saying he should have died in that.
Yes.
Like they just should have written that so that he didn't have that much plot armor in that moment.
Everyone is happy
Like
that Tormund lived. I don't think anyone is upset about
Hannibal is probably my favorite person from history, like at least top 3. I love Hannibal. I think he's
Hannibal?
I think Hannibal's amazing.
I mean, he's fine.
You're fine. Hannibal's amazing. Anyway, him utterly decimating the Romans at Cannae is just so good. And but it was a plan. They specifically were like, here's all the ways we're gonna trap these people. And then they trapped them and then they got him. It's like that meme. Ha! Got him. That's what they were thinking at the time. And Ramsay just doesn't have that tactical genius. I could buy it if they set it up, but it just happens accidentally. Like
Yeah.
The reason they were able to do that is because they were like, we're going to have the cavalry flank this way, and then the soldiers are they're going to turn, and then you're going to be like, oh crap. So the battle was already working in a way in which
Right.
that could happen. But Ramsay shoots his own soldiers to make this mound of bodies. And then he's just like, I'm so glad this worked out in my favor. Quick, illusion soldiers show up, and then they just pop up out of the mist, and there's like a stun gun that stuns Jon Snow for 20 seconds, so they can't do anything, and then they just get in position, and it's like, this is just the most convenient line of circumstances for this shit to happen, and I'm like, there's no way this could happen.
Oh my
There's
God.
no
First and foremost,
conceivable way
illusion
this could happen.
soldiers is my new favorite thing, because I 100% understand what you're saying on that. Like, I get it. And listen, I thought the bodies piling up too was really like useless when watching the episode. I was like, that's just getting in people's way, and it's really annoying. And didn't love that part of the episode. The parts that I did like were, this is one of the only times, if not the only time, while watching something that I felt so immersed in it that my breathing changed. When Jon is being trampled in that scene, like, I actually found myself like gripping for my throat.
Again, that is good directing and good acting.
Yes.
And so I will never take that. Like, that scene is just remarkable. But everything around it's bad. So I'm like, but yeah, I agree. Like, it is really good. Yeah.
I get it. I am normally, Chris can attest to this because we've been rewatching Wheel of Time together, and I am so nitpicky on some of the stuff in that show. I am normally like that person that's like, that's wrong, whatever. I don't know what it is about this episode that I am more forgiving about, because I think it probably is the art
viscerally hits you. Yeah.
Yes. It's so evocative for me that I actually, like, it doesn't matter how many times I rewatch that episode, that scene, if I'm fully focused on it, I find myself breathing differently. And to have that kind of reaction from me is amazing. So it gets like automatically,
I totally get it,
lifted up.
I'm sure there's more things that do this to me that I'm thinking of, but the thing that comes to mind to me is Ozymandias, Breaking Bad. Have you watched Breaking Bad?
I got through a couple of seasons of Breaking Bad, and then I moved on.
Okay. Go back. But regardless, the third to last episode of Breaking Bad is Ozymandias. It's, I think, and many people think, the best episode of TV ever. Like, when you actually Google like best episodes of TV, it's almost always like in the top 3.
Huh.
And I actually, fun fact, somebody, I think it was like Variety, I don't remember who, they did a poll of all of their staff of the best episodes of TV of all time, and then they put a little note at the top. We specifically told our staff to exclude Ozymandias because it would just be number 1 again.
Wow.
So they actually took it off. But anyway, that episode of TV, every time I watch it, like, I'm just literally for 45 minutes, I'm just feeling the utmost amount of dread in my life. I'm just like, and I know everything, how it turns out. Like, but I'm just like, and it is the most visceral 45 minutes of my life whenever I watch it. So I totally get why, if that's happening to you, that it doesn't matter the logic. Like, you're not thinking about the logic. You're thinking about how into the scene you are. So I totally get it. And I'm, all of my like snark and fake enemy stuff aside, I'm very glad that happens to you, because it's a rare thing. So
yeah, I mean, it's a really cool experience to have. And it's one of the only times I can really think of. I think there was another thing I watched where something similar-ish happened, and I remember thinking while it was happening, like, oh, this is the only other time other than Battle of the Bastards this happened. But it's rare that I am that immersed in something like that. So I find it intriguing on that note for that reason. But when the Aaron, the Vale, they show up or whatever, and we have this like big charge that come in, that to me is fine. Like, that to me is not the bulk of this episode. The bulk of this episode for me is Jon and Ramsay. Like, that's really at the core of this episode. And while I was watching it the first time, praying that Tormund lived, like, that was the major thing.
I have one more like secondary issue that ties into like the Tormund point I made, and then we're gonna talk about the bodies, which is my number 1 reason I hate this thing so much. Okay, so the way they utilize 1-1 in this episode, which is the giant,
not so good,
is not good, and it doesn't make any sense. So the scene that always makes me mad is when 1-1 is trying to get out from the circle, and he should have succeeded
Yeah.
succeeded, or at the very least almost succeeded. And this is like this whole episode suffers from the same problem with me, which is that like they don't think about the human psychology
Yeah.
of any of these things happening, except with John and like when he's suffocating. Like
Yeah.
that's good. These people have lived in the North their whole lives. They were children once. They were told stories, horror stories of giants. They
Yeah.
don't think giants are real. This is the first time they're ever seeing a giant. It's huge. It's 20 feet. It's 4 of them large.
Yeah.
There's a point where one tries to get through and they don't move at all, which I don't
Yeah.
think would happen. But I could maybe buy that they're like really brave soldiers and they're going to
Right.
stay. But then he picks up one of them and tears them in half.
Yeah.
Literally tears them in half. And there's just no way those people aren't breaking. They might not like literally turn and run, but they are
Right.
sure react. And they're literally just. And I'm like, this is absurd. First of all, he's so strong. He could pick up 2 of them and then throw them and like make a gap. So that the fact that he couldn't get through, I just hated it. And I'm like, you're not thinking about the fact that these soldiers are humans.
Yes.
And that takes me out of it. Like they should be acting like people in that moment.
That's
So
fair.
that's a secondary thing.
That's fair.
The pile of bodies is impossible. It is absolutely impossible. I hate
Apparently
this.
it happened
so
during
much.
the Civil War.
No,
Kyle.
it absolutely didn't, because the Civil War is not this episode. So let me tell you right now, it is impossible. It's so okay. So we're told at the beginning of this battle, Ramsay has 5,000 men and Jon Snow has half that. So let's say there are 7,500 human beings on this battlefield. There's like amount of bodies that's like. So the amount of bodies, they do a wide shot. It goes all the way past their entire army, and it's a huge mound. There's a guy climbing it, and he takes 8 steps on screen to get over it. But he's not even at the bottom. So it's at least 10 steps of people stepping over these mounds of bodies. This is 100,000 people dead. Easily. I mean, easily. It's not 7,500. Probably. But even if it was, there's still a whole army. There's a whole army of people still fighting. So where are all these bodies coming from? This is not possible. And not only that, if it was just a numbers game, I could forgive it. I'm like, whatever, but it's still impossible because the way it happens, they're all fighting. So they crash together and then Ramsay shoots and he starts shooting people. And then all of us, and I'm like, not possible. This does not happen. You cannot you could have like minor piles of, like, it would be different if it was like 10 bodies, but it's like a huge pile all the way around. And it's like, people would just stop fighting there.
Yeah.
Like move on, like all the people there would be dead. And then the other people would be fighting over here, so that there's no longer, like, logically, it is impossible.
But there's the illusion soldiers,
It
Kyle.
is so stupid.
It's the illusion soldiers.
The illusion soldiers are more believable. It's fantasy. But I know that these bodies are impossible in any land. All lands, these bodies are impossible. It defies physics. It defies math. It defies math. Math is the same everywhere.
Baseline for you don't like this episode because of logic, whereas I really like this episode because I'm not thinking in logical terms whatsoever. So I mean, that's the issue,
and that's totally fine. It's totally fine. But it's just, it's cathartic because I watched this episode 5 years ago or whatever, and I was like, I hated it, and now I get to rant. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I still love the episode.
I really hate that pile of bodies. I'm like, it is so impossible.
I don't love it either. Like, honestly, I don't love it either. But I do love that scene where the 3 of them come together after the veil has kind of come in and they've like run over the circle or whatever. And then John pokes up like a little meerkat, and then Tormund and one are his other meerkats, and they all go running off to Winterfell. Like, fine. Which also, okay. Side note, because I'm doing another side note. The ways that they changed the exterior to Winterfell and King's Landing in that show to suit their needs for whatever episode they were doing is so absurd. Because if we're talking about that battle with Stannis, when there's all of a sudden this woods, I'm like, where is the woods?
I love how like in season 8, King's Landing is just around a desert.
A desert, not the water, a desert. And I'm like,
in winter, by the way.
Yeah, like, come on, guys. Come on. But anyway, they get to the battle or the gates of Winterfell, and Ramsay's secured himself inside, which is fine. 1-1 breaks the door down. And this scene is sad in the show for me because 1-1 in the show is the last giant and eats it. And John, you can see
there's a giant in the Battle of Winterfell. Lyanna Mormont kills him.
Right, but he's in the other army. I'm saying in terms of like
like last living. Okay, right. I
Yes.
see what you're saying.
Yes. Non-corrupted giant.
I thought you meant last one we see on screen. You're right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I got you.
And John has this like moment where he understands very briefly the significance of 1-1 dying, but then kind of has to shift focus back to where he is. And I really like that scene where John kind of reaches out to almost touch him to comfort him basically, and then realizes he can't and then has to refocus. And that exchange at the end of the episode go ahead. What were you saying?
No, go ahead. I was just going to agree with you.
Okay. The exchange that Ramsay and John then have in the opening, I'll call it like the foyer of Winterfell, basically, is one of my favorites. And my husband can attest to this. I laugh hysterically every time Ramsay falls backwards when John starts punching him. It's like probably my favorite punch of all cinema ever. It's so funny. He has this like gasp of air and goes and like falls backwards, and it's absolutely hysterical. I love it so much. But I really like that build up where John is walking up towards him and Ramsay's kind of like last ditch effort shooting arrows at him. I like this scene. Do you hate this scene?
No, like again, so I think there's a lot of things that are stupid about the later seasons, and this is like on the face of it stupid. Yeah. But at that point, it's now about, so I actually go the entirely opposite way of my previous argument. Now it's about the characters. So it is about the human psychology in that scene, which is that Ramsay this is his last ditch, and John is just white, cold fury. And he's just like, no, I could have all these people kill you, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to show how pathetic you are.
Yes.
And so it all works for me. Like logically, the idea that he would just stand there and just shoot, and like, I mean, it's stupid, but like, I just don't care because the character, like it's about the characters
right
in the scene. The reason the battle scene frustrates me is that it's not about the characters, it's about spectacle.
That's fair. I can get behind that. We then also see John kind of looks to Sansa because Sansa is not really approving of John's behavior in this scene, which I find like semi interesting, but I'm like, so okay. To go back again, Bookborn posted her video last week that she read the first book, A Game of Thrones, for you for your birthday, for a birthday gift. She said in her video, which she owned because I wrote her about it, that she liked every singular POV in that book. And I said, even Sansa.
I saw your comment and I was like,
yeah. Well, she and I wrote each other about it because I was like, Sansa and I have some longstanding issues with each other. And that for me kind of is Sansa in this episode. It's like that typical irritating, all the irritating aspects of Sansa, like we were talking about earlier, where she's proving people wrong, but then there's no follow through ever. And you're like, come on, do something. But the end of this episode was actually very much a positive Sansa moment for me, where when she looks back to make sure that the dogs eat him and like revels in that moment a little bit, because it's this transitionary moment, I feel like, for her character, in that she's now starting to maybe take on a bit of the characteristics that she learned in King's Landing. And I think that's interesting for her. But Sansa.
So I vaguely disagree with you, but like I don't know why. Like, do you know? Does that make sense? I'm not firm about this at all. I'm very firm on like the pile of bodies and stuff like that. But this, I'm like, what you're saying makes sense to me. Like, I totally get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah.
I have a feeling in my heart that I disagree, but I can't voice it. So we might come back to that at some point when I think about it. I just did a reread of A Game of Thrones, and so. I mean, I'm more on Bookborn's side, but I was on your side to begin with. Like when I first, like I told Bookborn when she gave me her reactions after, she was like, I haven't checked with the fandom yet, but I'm pretty sure that the fans are going to hate Sansa just based on how I know fandoms are. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. They hate Sansa. I'm like, but I'm going to be honest. I read this when I was 17 and I was absolutely anti-Sansa.
Yeah.
Now I have more life experience and mostly I feel sad for her. And I'm like, I mean, she's an 11-year-old.
Yeah. And
that doesn't mean
she
doesn't have frustrating characteristics. Like she would frustrate me, but I also think she's a child. Show Sansa is a different problem, which is that they don't know what her personality is.
Yeah.
They don't know. I swear, I would bet my entire life savings, which is like $2, that, that if I sat D&D down and I was like, explain the characteristics of Sansa Stark in
Yeah, they wouldn't
season
be able
1,
to.
I think they could do it. And then if I said, explain the personality characteristics of Sansa Stark in season 7, they just couldn't do it. They would say some bullshit,
Yeah.
but like it wouldn't be followed through. Like they just don't know. They just think she's a girl boss.
100%.
And it's fake feminism, and it really drives me crazy.
I agree.
And it's one of the reasons why when people criticize like Martin for having like, violence against women or something, like that's totally fair. But then they sometimes take that to be like, instead of violence against women, it's that he's sexist. And I'm like, no, the
Which he's
show
not. Yeah, he's
is
not.
doing some stuff that makes you think that, but he's absolutely not. And Sansa is a very feminist character as written in the books, whether or not you hate her or not. Like it's a different kind of strength.
Yes, it is. It very much
a
is.
lot of women in this role, in this type of time period, would have been like this, but she's trying to, like, over time, having her own type of strength. I love that, even if she frustrates me. In the show, it's just I just feel like every single one of her lines needs a after.
Exactly.
And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
That's exactly. So when she and I were talking about it, she being bookworm, I was saying, Sansa drove me insane when I read the books, but I was 20 when I read them. And she and I were talking about, I feel like for women, especially, if you have read this series before having children, you might view Sansa differently as after having children. And I thought about that, and I thought, yes, because I now have a daughter, and I was like, I could view this differently. And also, I completely forget that these people are children, because they are not. This is my one major criticism of Martin, is that children aren't written like children in this series at all.
Bran is.
Bran
is written like a kid.
To a point. But I feel like overall, these are not kids. Like, they're written more as young adults or adults. So I lapse that in my brain where I'm like, Sansa's 11. I'm like, Sansa's like 16. And I'm like, a 16-year-old who should know somewhat better. And I'm like, oh no, she's 11. So, I mean, I got it. But that's kind of where the episode ends. And then you're left to remember that.
So you specifically, do you like, I know you said you like the end of the scene where she looks back, but do you like that that's Ramsay's end and how that happens?
I don't know, because obviously the dogs are a big part of show Ramsay, but Ramsay in the book is so different, right? Because he was never married to Sansa. So it's a completely different dynamic. I mean, when I watched it the first time, I remember thinking, like, that's a satisfying ending. Like, it's nice to see a villain kind of just get theirs, because it seldom happens in this show, I feel like, where the good guys win. And Ramsay is a terrible person. So you sit back and you go, okay, I'm happy with that. I feel like they probably could have done more with the Ramsay character had they wanted to. But also, I was convinced when I watched this scene for the first time that Sansa was pregnant, because Ramsay has this line that he says, "You can't kill me. I'm a part of you now." And I was like, is she pregnant? And I thought, like,
this literally.
Yeah. And I was like, literally? Like, could that be that she's like carrying part of him with her forward? Like, could that be what's happening? And that for me was a thought process. And then, of course, nothing like that happened.
I'm very conflicted on this, because I don't know how I feel. And like, part of it is that I'm not a woman. So like, I try to be aware of like the way feminism is interpreted in book and film and stuff, because I think it's important. But sometimes I just don't have the right, like, I mean, I'm not going to always have the right perspective. So I acknowledge that. But it feels like to me that Sansa reveling in this vicious death is like a step. It feels like fake girl bossing more than actually like a strong character moment, but I don't know how to define that. And I would move on that point pretty quickly if somebody like explained it differently to me. But like, to me, it's like this common thing where it's like, we think of Brienne and Arya as strong female characters because they fight in men's armor or like kill people.
Right.
But actually they're strong female characters in a different way in the books, right? Like it's not so like taking on male characteristics necessarily. And so it feels like to me that Sansa giving in to that brutality is like us being like, yeah, like she should want revenge, like a man would. But and
Yeah,
I know revenge is not like an exclusively male trait. Like
sure.
obviously like there can be a woman that wants to see him viciously eaten. Like that's totally
Yes.
fine. But it just feels like with Sansa's overarching plot to that point, like she had to be in this like terrible marriage. I don't know. Something about it just irked me a little. Like I can't really put my finger on it. But I also hate Ramsay with so much passion. I'm like, yeah, I want him to have as
Yeah.
vicious a death as possible. And I do feel like we were kind of robbed of that with Joffrey. Like
Oh, 100%.
Joffrey just kind of died out of nowhere. So
Yeah.
like to see him just like viscerally just get owned and like the dogs, it's just disgusting. I think it's just how enjoyable Sansa found it. I don't know. Like I'm just mixed on it.
So I feel like there's two different ways that you can look at it if you're looking at it from the perspective that it's good character growth versus a regression in character growth. And I feel like
Yes.
for one thing, Sansa leaves the North. Okay, excluding book Sansa, because at this point, like this would not be book Sansa's
Yeah, absolutely.
storyline. So show Sansa leaves Winterfell when she's like 12 or 13, 14, let's say, whatever. That's a pretty fundamental age for a girl. And like girls that tend to embrace their femininity, especially at that age, tend to start looking to older women around them for as examples. Cersei is really the only example that is available to Sansa at this point. She's cruel, she's unloving, and she's basically just terrible. So Sansa's model is now this behavior. Remove Cersei, and all of the people that end up surrounding Sansa over the course of the next few years are equally terrible in some way, shape, or form. Secondly, she's then married basically to a rapist and is raped repeatedly.
Yeah.
And I myself am not a rape victim, so I can't speak to that, but I could imagine from just watching that, I would want to see my rapist or any rapist ripped apart by dogs. So, like from those two perspectives, I feel like because of the influences that were around Sansa, and there's a line later in the episode in which they pull that sneakeroo and they kill Baelish, which is an awesome scene, I think.
Yes.
But she says in that, I'm a slow learner, but I do learn. And I feel like that is exemplified in this scene because she's taken what she's learning from the people that have been around her. And that's been Baelish, and that's been Cersei and Joffrey and Ramsay for the last couple of years.
So, like, first of all, excellent breakdown. Like, fantastic. I still don't know that I agree. Like, I agree with all of the points that you made, but those are all villains.
Well,
Like,
100%. But that's the thing. That's who she's been around.
That scene is present to us as if we should be feeling positive that she feels that she's doing that. And I don't know.
I don't know if it's that we should feel positive about it. I think it's more so that we should feel that it's realistic, because I think that if it was still season 1, season 2 Sansa, she wouldn't have even gone to see him. Like she would have been so mortified that she wouldn't have done that. But she's now lived through Cersei. Well, she's lived through her dad being mutilated in front of her. She's lived through Cersei, lived through Joffrey, has now lived through Ramsay. This is a person that has endured terrible people and terrible things happening to her. It's gonna start to build up in a person. Like you can't just wash that off and be like,
yeah, now that we're thinking about it, I wonder, because I don't think I had a problem with it when I first watched it. Like I mostly just hated the battle. Like I thought that was fine. I wonder if my frustration with the scene is retroactive. With like, I think they just ruined Sansa throughout the last couple.
They do 100%.
So like the lack of follow through in that scene, I think is maybe what is niggling at me. I don't know. Like I would have to think about this more. Because it didn't really occur to me.
I wonder if
I just know, like, when I was watching it this time, I was vaguely annoyed.
I wonder, though, if it is lack of follow-through or if this is kind of similar to what we were saying with Daenerys earlier on, that this is where they're starting to sow those seeds of what's going to happen. Because Sansa in the last season is, like, a whole thing. But she is super independent, wants the North to be independent. Like, this is what she's fought for kind of thing. She's strong, blah, 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 blah. And is this supposed to be that moment where we look at that and go, okay, this is the origin of that Sansa, basically? Like, when this happens? I don't know.
I don't know either. I have a theory that sorry, my rabbit was just being weird for a second. I have a theory that Sansa, like, I think the showrunners did so much of the ending to be fan service,
100%.
and that's part of the reason why it's unsatisfying. Like, I think most of us agree that, like, I mean, come on, Bronn as like the Lord of the Reach. That's straight up absurd. That like doesn't make
Yes,
any sense. That's like
agreed.
that's not the thing that makes me the angriest about the ending, but that is like the thing that's just like absolutely is just not.
Agreed.
And so I think that people the first real major criticism that the show got, both of them were rape centric. One was
Yeah.
when they changed Jamie and Cersei into it being like a straight up rape scene,
Yes.
which like I was furious about.
Yep.
And then the second is the Sansa scene. And those two scenes, like people were very vocally upset about.
Yes.
And that obviously would impact them, even if they won't admit it. And I just wonder if they were just like, Sansa's gonna have this independent arc, because like Sansa doesn't, man, she just frustrates me. And I don't know why. It's like I just feel like the hand of a man writing her being like, oh, this is what a cool woman would say.
Yeah.
Like that's what I feel like in the last 3 seasons, like all the time. And that's not how she felt before. And that's not how I feel about like every female character.
Yeah.
But when she just says stupid shit, like she's just like the North is independent now. And I'm like, so the Northmen are just gonna like
Agree to that.
agree to have a queen for the
Yeah.
first time. Like you haven't consolidated your rule. You don't have any spokespeople there for you. Like it just is such a like a baseless thing to say.
Yes.
So I think that and that might play into my feelings on this scene, which is just that I feel like they just started writing things to just be like, see, she is a strong character. That's what I feel like.
Honestly, I could get behind that theory. I do feel like a lot of the time, and this isn't limited to Game of Thrones, but you can definitely tell that the majority of writers in a room are men for
Yeah.
women, and the things they do and the things they say, I'm like, nope. Like a woman wouldn't say that. And it's interesting though that we kind of talked about it earlier in the sense that we view Arya and Brienne as more of the like strong female characters, despite the fact that they tend to exhibit more masculine, typically associated masculine traits in the series, because Brienne has in her storyline a very touching side of femininity, and it's touched upon briefly in the show with her, you know, wanting to have a relationship with Jamie, and in the book it's addressed by the fact that like she felt she had to take on this kind of lifestyle because no one thought she was beautiful, so on and so forth. Like there are ways to do nuanced like female empowered
Absolutely.
characters, and Brienne is a good example of that. And yeah, Sansa they really just went off the rails with. And I remember when that Ramsay Sansa scene came out, and the backlash that came from it. And I was one of them, because I remember just thinking, this is so unnecessary at this point. Like this girl has been passed along to everybody. And like, we didn't need this scene. You could have had it cut to black and it would have been like the same thing. We would have known, you know?
Yeah. I had a really long Facebook rant about it. Like it showed up in my Facebook memories recently. It was like long. I was like, this is ridiculous. These people are ruining this whole show. Like it was like the biggest nerd rage.
Yeah.
And then like in the comments, people were like agreeing with me. And then I would do like another mini rant. I was like, dude, I was worked up about this.
Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't good. So in terms of watching the end of Ramses because of the show Ramses, yes, like it's gratifying that we see him torn apart by dogs, and you're like, good, he's an asshole. Like I'm happy that this happened to him. I'll be interested to see what happens to Book Ramsay, because Book Ramsay is also not a good dude, but he also hasn't been going about it with a main character in that way.
Yeah, I will be interested to see that, because I really don't like, I could be wrong. I don't think Ramsay's the end game for the Boltons in the same way that the show made it. First of all, you cast Iwan Rheon, you're gonna I mean, Michael McHenry, good actor, played Roose Bolton very well. I have no problems with that, but
Love him.
he is not Iwan Rheon. I'm saying his name. You know what I mean? So for him to kill his dad and then become like the main villain, like that just makes logical sense in how you set that up.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how the book is going to go. I think Roose is way more interesting and dynamic of a character in the book.
Yes, 100%.
And he also is so aware of what Ramsay is, and he's said that like Ramsay's friends are all on his payroll, and like even like Lady Dustin is talking about how like Roose is just like he's like using everybody as his playthings. Like that, like one of the last like Winterfell chapters we get, she says to Theon, she's like, "We're all just Roose's playthings. He doesn't really feel emotions. Like he's just doing all this to see us. It just mildly amuses him." So for him to like then be killed really early in Winds of Winter does not make a lot of sense to me, for them to set that up that way and then for it to just be immediately subverted. I could be wrong. That could be what George is intending.
I mean, I would have to agree.
It seems like Roose is going to be a bigger threat than Ramsay, and Ramsay's just going to be like a crazy mad dog to like throw into the mix.
I mean, that's entirely possible, especially because the back setup that you have for Roose is the Red Wedding. So obviously, like, he's already a really bad dude. And the way that Martin writes things, nothing is fast, I feel like. Most characters' downfalls are pretty slow. So even if it is the intention that Ramsay does kill him, I don't see that being an immediate thing. I would maybe see it at the end of the book, maybe. But
I think the Boltons are done in Winds of Winter. I would be very shocked. I would be very shocked if either of them make it to Dream of Spring, and if they do, like maybe first couple. It just seems like that plotline needs to wrap itself up so we get to the important stuff.
Which, I mean, as we discussed, we're never gonna get.
With Martin, maybe he'll be like, "There's 9 books actually."
That's a
at least let me wrap up the Boltons, Martin. Like, come on, give me Winds, wrap up the Boltons.
Have some satisfactory endings for some of these people. I mean, come on, I will be interested to see if we ever get either of these books and who kind of makes it through, because my biggest complaint of the Battle of Winterfell is the fact that every major person lived. Like, that for me was a big problem. Like, I get that Lyanna Mormont dies, who I really, really liked as a character in the show. I think she's great. We have Ed from The Wall. Fine. That's it. I was like,
what are you talking about? Theon and Jorah die.
Whatever. They die too. But it's like, you should have had everybody bite it. Like, realistically, come on. Everyone should have died.
So I mostly agree with you. Jorah and Theon's deaths were very good, except for the fact that like Theon just charges at the Night King. Absurd. But like his actual like decision to stay and defend, and Jorah defending Dany, like those are both good. That totally works. And then it strips Dany of her last like advisor, so she can then go mad. Like, the building blocks for a good story are there. It's just execution.
And that's exactly it. But like by saying we, my husband and I, we for years were prophesizing, okay, what's going to take down the Night King? Because obviously we knew that they're leading to this battle at Winterfell. And I was like, okay, what I think would be the most interesting is, because when you see the Tower of Joy episode, when Bran goes and witnesses the killing of Arthur Dayne, which is one of my favorite sequences of the whole series, he's able to change the past by calling to Ned. He says, "Father," and Ned looks back. And then when he goes back a second time, Ned then looks back, and like the past has changed. So what I thought was going to happen is that maybe Theon dies in the Godswood, or like is injured or something. Bran then touches the Night King and like wargs into the Night King somehow and is able to control him. And then maybe Theon is able to like stand up and kill the Night King. Like, that would have been so much more interesting to me than having him just charge at.
That would have been more interesting.
Right? Like, that would have been such a cool ending, because listen, I get the whole notion that they were like,
I'm gonna
go ahead.
I'm gonna tweak that a little bit, because I don't think Theon in any sense should get the major redemption of killing the great villain. That scene should be exactly how you said it, except Jon should already be there, and Jon and Theon are defending Bran, and then Theon gets killed right before that, and that's when Bran is able to do it, and then Jon kills the Night King.
That would have been fine with me, because the whole not having Azor Ahai in the show for me was like a major sore point, because I was like, we're leading up to Azor Ahai, and then there was nothing that came from it. But
modern audiences can't say Azor Ahai, so we're just gonna have to get rid of it. And also we got to get rid of dire wolves, because they look weird, and we got to get rid of all magic, because it's magic.
In the beginning of that episode, when Ghost is part of that charge, I about lost my ever loving mind. I looked at the group of people we were with because we were watching it as a collective, and I was like, what's Ghost doing? Why is he sending Ghost? Where's Ghost? Is Ghost okay? And like, could not calm down until I saw that doc at the end of the
Yeah,
episode.
and to follow up on that, I guess we just transition into trashing this. We're
Yes.
trashing all battle episodes in this one. Is that it's not so much that everybody lived; it's how they lived in ridiculous circumstances.
Yeah.
Like again, like you are writing the episode, so if you say Sam has to survive this episode, that's totally fine. We all
Yep.
want Sam to survive the episode. What makes people mad is when Sam has no fighting skills, and we see him 15 times being torn
Yeah.
apart, like oh.
Exactly.
And then we cut away 15 minutes, and we're like, I guess Sam's dead. And then we come back, and he's just like, how did he get
Yeah.
out of that? Like,
There was a
you
lot
know what I
of
mean? And that was just the whole
choices.
episode.
The only death I feel like I was really okay with in the way it was executed in that episode was Melisandre at the end of the episode, just kind of like withering away. I was like, I'm okay with that.
Oh, I forgot that
Yeah,
happened.
at the end of the episode,
Also,
when she just,
I didn't like Brecht Dondarrion dying at all, and that's not because I care about the character that much. It just like, again, he lived through all of that and was resurrected by Azor Ahai 7 times because he could get Arya into a room. Like, come on.
Yes.
Like,
That for me was also a major issue. So I 100% agree because I actually really like Barrick's character. So I was just irritated from that front too.
Yeah, exactly. Like I like him, but he dies in the book to bring back Lady Stoneheart, which they were just like too magical, not cool. So then they just kept him.
Yeah.
For that. And I'm like,
yeah, because I mean, they completely didn't do the Lady Stoneheart plot in the show, which is a bummer because I thought that would have been really interesting. But I mean,
unrelated, because we can talk about this because this is full spoilers. Bookborn has been like telling me like theories and stuff. Well, not so many theories, but she got kind of spoiled on the on some stuff, and so she thinks she knows what the Red Wedding is. So she was like, I got spoiled on the Red Wedding. It was just like randomly on Reddit, and I got spoiled. And I was like, no, because she doesn't know what it is. And so she's like, yeah, like Joffrey dies at the Red Wedding. And I'm like, okay, this is almost as perfect as we could have made this because the Red Wedding is first. So now she's gonna be like, well, Joffrey dies at the Red Wedding.
Yeah.
So when the actual Red Wedding is about to happen, she'll be like, this isn't it, and then just Murder City, and then Joffrey dying isn't that big of a spoiler.
Child.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
That's so bad. Yeah.
But she's like, oh, I think I just need to binge these books so that I don't get spoiled more. I'm like, yes, you do.
Yeah,
and
honestly.
I need to know about it.
Yeah. Oh gosh. If she I mean, I was shocked that she didn't know that Ned died. I was like, how do you not know? That's like the major thing that people know from the show and book. It's like
so funny.
It's Sean Bean. He always dies.
She was like, wow, him getting his head cut off didn't leave a lot of room for ambiguity. I was like, that's because he died.
I mean, I will say, and this is a fault of fantasy that I feel is just, it's irksome to me, that whenever a character dies now, I question as to whether or not they're actually dead. So when Ned died in the book and I read it, it was before the show had come out. And I was like, well, he's probably gonna come back somehow, right? Like that's gonna be a thing. And then he's just like, no, he's dead. I was like, well, okay. I appreciate that about Martin, at least that like there's not a lot of that. Whereas, I mean, like we're gonna get that with John.
It's funny that he does that. Well, he didn't listen. Martin does not say that. When Dance with Dragon comes out, he had an interview, and the interviewer is a dunce. I'm sure he's a lovely person, but he took John being dead as like a fact. Like and I was just like, first of all, bad fantasy literacy, but second of all, just like all the setup in the book. Like I just think you didn't read it, but he was like, for sure, he's like, oh, I can't believe you killed Jon Snow. Like that's just incredible. Like wow. And then Martin was like, oh, you think he's dead, do you? Like Martin just straight up was like, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, also, even if he is, Melisandre is there. Like all of the things have been set in place that like John's gonna live. So you're like, it's not,
I mean, the prologue of A Dance with Dragons is literally nonsense if John doesn't come back. Yeah. So I mean,
I haven't read it yet.
Also,
but I will.
You haven't read A Dance with Dragons?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Winds of Winter now. I'm jumping back and forth in my
Oh,
brain.
no. Varamir Sixskin's like prologue is like just specifically to set up like Bran and Jon stuff.
Yeah. Oh, Bran. That's a whole other thing.
Listen, Bran's next chapter is going to be interesting. Do you buy the Jojen paste theory? Do you know about that?
Which theory is this now?
So this is a very common theory on the internet. I don't buy it, which is that Jojen has been saying since his first appearance, "I've seen the day that I die. Today is not the day that I die." All that stuff. And then when Jon gets to the Three-Eyed Raven, Jojen gets more morose and like he gets more depressed and he's acting weird and kind of being all sullen to himself. And then like in the last Bran chapter, I don't think Jojen's in it, or if he is, he's like in it for just like a second. And Mira's like, yeah, like he's acting weird or whatever, something like that. And then Bran is like connected to the Wyrewere network, you know, like matrixing up, and he's seeing all these visions, and then he starts tasting blood. And then that's how the chapter ends. And so the theory is that like the Three-Eyed Raven killed Jojen and used his blood as like a sacrifice so that Bran could like connect to the Weirwoods.
I don't buy that.
I don't buy it. It's a very common theory. Like a lot of people take it as like gospel, and I'm like, guys, I don't think this is what's going on.
I don't think so. I do want to keep talking, but my battery just started flashing at me.
No
that
worries.
It's about to die.
We covered the whole episode half an hour ago. So
we did. So we'll have to have another one where we talk about another episode or just general Game of Thrones things. And also we can then talk about our shared Wheel of Time comments and our differing comments of Way of Kings. There's a lot of things to talk about.
I don't know if I want to. But no, this was very fun. It's nice to like talk to people about disagreements, because BookTube I love, but I feel like everybody comes on, like, you know, you go to a Hob thing and it's like 6 people who love Hob.
Yeah.
And that's great. But I'm saying sometimes healthy disagreement is really good for conversation and thinking about stuff. So thank you for inviting me on.
Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for everyone that joined us. I will keep you posted on our Frenemies episode 2 when that happens. We will talk to you.
Bye, everybody.
Soon. Bye.